everyone. I'm Karen Plater and the Associate Secretary for Stewardship and Planned Giving at the Presbyterian Church in Canada, and I'm really delighted to host you today for this webinar. I'm going to turn it over to Lori now to begin because I see it's 1:01, and I'll let you take it away. We've got a lot planned for today. I hope you have your pens and paper or your computer ready because we're going to give you an opportunity to start working on your letters. All right, see you later. Lori, we can't hear you right now. We lost your sound. Lori, we can't hear you.
Is this better? Can you hear me now?
Oh, yay, we can hear you now. Yay.
Okay. I am here, and I want to say thank you to the Presbyterian Church in Canada and to Presbyterian Sharing for sponsoring this webinar. It is, I think, the most ambitious one we've tried, so let's see what happens. Here is me. You don't have a full effect of all the snow that's happening in Mississauga right now, but wow, it is really snowing. So picture me with like a total white background. I think lots of you have met me before, but I am that interesting person who would study statistics and then theology and then do a doctorate specializing in Christian giving. And I have a website at lgreeser.com. You can check me out. I have quite a lot of stuff posted at this point. So I work with stewardship and fundraising, church and money and charity. That's my thing. And I've done this in so many different contexts, as a donor, as a board member, as a pastor, as a theologian. Please type in your questions. If you've been here before, you know that that's how we like to roll. There's a chat box with the session, so please type them in. Karen does an excellent job of reading them out and keeping us rolling along with the questions. So please don't hesitate to do that. That makes it more interesting for everyone.
If you're on your phone, we've already muted your phones. But if you keep them muted, then we won't have any background noises. Thanks.
So asking for money, write a fundraising letter with the Apostle Paul. And yes, if you have pen and paper, we're going to try to actually get an outline of a letter done here. Now I want to start off, if you're a runner, and if you already knew how to run 5K, then running 10K wouldn't be hard. If you normally just walk from the house to your car, then running, a 10K would be a bit of a stretch. So this, if you've already been with us and you're working with, telling stories about the offering and saying thank you and being really intentional about your stewardship, then I don't think this webinar will be too much of a stretch for you. If this is the first time that you're with us on these webinars on stewardship, I super encourage you to take the opportunity also, stay with us, but also to go back, because a lot of this webinar builds on things that we've done earlier. So all of these webinars, this one included, will be on the website. So they're there, you can look at them more than once. All right, so the Apostle Paul, our good friend who wrote so many letters in the New Testament, he had this big project where he collected money from his various churches, and the money was going to the believers in Jerusalem. And Paul wrote about this, especially in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, and I've spent rather a long time studying 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. And we Christians give in grateful obedience to God's abundant grace. We have a wonderful theology to draw on, absolutely a wonderful theology. And that matters because when we're writing a letter, we want to model it on this great theology that we have. We're not the Cancer Society. We don't need to, we have even a better even a better model for giving and for asking. So be not afraid. The angels always say, don't be afraid. And I want to say that too. As we've said, a pen and paper would be a great help here. And this is recorded and the handout will be on the website. So again, if you don't catch it all as fast as it's coming, you have the opportunity to go again. So to write a fundraising letter, we need to know two things. If we're basing it on Paul's approach, we need to know what Paul's approach is. And we need to know, well, what exactly is a fundraising letter? Because this is something that I know inspires a lot of fear. So I am here to be as encouraging as possible and to hold your hand and say, you can do this. This is the Circle of Grace giving model. Some of you might have seen this before. It's something that I refer to a lot and that I've just found to be very useful. It's based on a New Testament theologian called James Dunn, who is a heavy hitter in the world of theology. But it's based on Paul's work and how he explains it to the Corinthians. He starts it with God, and we start with God at the top. God's grace is everything. What do we have that we haven't received? Everything we've received is pure grace from God. So we're the people, and we respond with gracious action to all the grace we've received. And we're both givers and receivers because we are both passing God's grace along and having other people pass grace along to us. That's what a community of faith is about. People who have received grace are grateful and respond with praise and thanksgiving. And that's what the circle is. If we don't put God into this circle and just think about it as our money that you're trying to extract from me, we end up with this helpful little model here of the closed wallet and the clenched fist. We're really trying to avoid that model. So now you see the same Circle of Grace model, and I've sort of made some modifications here, because if we leave God out of the picture and just think about it as people giving money to people and take God's grace out of it, we have lots and lots of role models for that, but that we have a better theology and a bigger viewpoint than that. So here it is again, without the X's, and just think of God's grace flowing to us and our opportunity as a community of faith to extend that gracious action in so many ways, through welcome, through worship, through hospitality, through service, and then being thankful for that grace and thanking God, and the circle continuing. I've highlighted the last section of the circle here, the praise and thanksgiving, because if we are going to be asking people for money, we cannot leave out any steps of the circle. And so I want to ask you, and here's my next slide, did you thank these people that we want to write a letter to, these people, did you thank this person? Did you thank these people for their previous gift? Did you thank God? That's really, really, really essential. It's good theology, it's good fundraising practice, but that's almost incidental because it's good theology. Did we thank God for the people's generosity? So what I'm going to show you next is a thank you letter. We used this thank you letter in a previous webinar, and as we go through it, you're going to find that a thank you letter is actually very, very similar to a fundraising letter. A fundraising letter just has a, yes, can you help us with this? And here's why in the middle. But it's still based on gratitude, and it's still based on God's grace. So I'm going to give you these slides with the letter. Your situation, of course, is going to be a little bit different, but imitation being the sincerest form of flattery, you're welcome to borrow parts of this letter. I imagine that we're writing to Mary. Maybe we're not. We are never, ever, ever writing to dear friend. We're always writing to someone by name. As we celebrate 130 years of ministry at St. Andrew's, I am grateful for the people who have come before us and built this church. I am grateful for the people who prayed this community into existence and whose prayers sustain it still. St. Andrew's is a place of worship and welcome for so many in our community. People gather on Sunday morning and also for community programs like Girl Guides and Boy Scouts. They gather for weddings and funeral. I thank God for faithful donors like you whose contributions sustain our church as a place of worship and welcome. The rest you can read. It's more examples of what happens when you give your money to St. Andrew's or to whatever church it is. What kind of ministry happens at your church? And here is, as it starts with a recognition of God's grace, it ends the same way. We praise God for our continued worship together. We are a community of hope, a community who trusts that our generous God multiplies our efforts and our gifts. Thanks be to God. In Christian love, Reverend Kay Penner. Reverend Kay Penner is also the pastor of Peach Blossom. It gets used in a lot of examples. It's one of my repertoire. So that letter is a thank you letter, but can you see that if you put a request in the middle, that it's the same elements? Okay, so now we've thanked the people before we started asking them for money, and if that seems terrifying, it's not so bad. It's an opportunity to express your gratitude. And I would so encourage you, as I have in previous webinars, to pick up the phone at the board of, at your leadership meeting, whether that's the elders or whatever structure you have in place, and phone people and say, thank you so much for your faithful giving in 2018. It doesn't have to be long. You're not asking them for anything. Just say thank you. They will be happy to hear from you. Okay, so for our fundraising letter, what we're going to do, you've got your pen and paper, is we're going to go through these steps. We're going to think about what we're thankful for, this first circle here with the grace. We're going to think about what gracious action is required, and we're going to be specific about that. We're going to be really very specific about what gracious action we're requesting. And then we're going to follow it up with praise and thanksgiving. We're going to thank them in advance for what their generosity will accomplish. So gratitude and grace abounds. It abounds. All right, that's a lot of content already. Are there any questions? Is this a familiar, for some of you, this might be a little bit of a familiar model, but for others, it might not be. So there's no silly questions. All questions are good questions. Don't be shy.
So one question, Lori, is should you mix a thank you letter with an ask letter?
I think that an ask letter includes thank you for sure, but when someone gives to your church or any charity, then your immediate and personal response should be thank you, and it wouldn't include an ask. It would just say thank you.
Yeah, that's my experience too, Lori. All right, I don't see any other questions at this moment, so why don't you keep going, and I'm sure they will come along.
I imagine they will, yes.
Oh, wait, no, wait, I do have a question. Should the letter be signed by the pastor?
The more personal and the more connected, the better. We are going to get to some of those absolute specifics of it. What we're going to do now, I'll move on to the next one, is go through this model again. It's the same model. I've just made it more specific to what we're doing here. So grab your pen and your paper. We're going to start with this first thing of recognizing God's grace to our church. And we have to think here on this Wednesday in February, in whatever context you find yourself, what are you grateful for in your congregation? How do you recognize God's grace being extended to you in your congregation right here, right now? What are you thankful for? And I would be so delighted if any of you had something that you could share with us to say, you know, I'm really thankful for my congregation right now, because it doesn't have to be big, it just has to be real. In the letter that we read earlier, the imaginary letter, they were thankful for the history of the church and all the faithful people who had gone before, whose prayers and whose generosity and whose faithfulness had built that congregation. So that's one way of thinking about gratitude. You can think about what the future of your church is going to be, or what gifts are being offered right now. it's essential to write with recognizing how God's grace is being extended to your church. Otherwise, we're going to write out of a very dry place, and it will show. Does anyone have an example of what something that they're thankful for in their church right now? Okay, well, I'm hoping you're thankful for that you take into account the ongoing miracle of gathering to worship on a Sunday. We often just think that, oh yeah, well, that's what we do.
Here's one. Somebody is thankful for God raising up new elders who are enthusiastic.
Oh, that'd be great. I can totally see that as the beginning to a letter. Dear Mary, I'm writing to you today full of gratitude for the new elders that have been raised up here at, I'm going to call it St. Andrews again. Their enthusiasm is so encouraging to me. Yeah, there's a great start for a letter.
Here's another one. We are thankful that we made our Presbyterian sharing commitment last year, the first time in many years. We even increased our commitment by $500 for the 2019 fiscal year.
Thanks be to God. That's a great story. And then I think you could even ask someone like, say, Karen Plater to say, and could you share a story with me of the great things that Presbyterian sharing is accomplishing? And we'll share that. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. So I can see the gears in motion. So that's encouraging to me. Thinking of the it doesn't have to be big. Just knowing that someone has been ill and people in the church are bringing soup. The small ongoing miracles are ones that we often forget to name, but I am certain that you have them happening in your church.
I've got another one, Lori. Nicole says, I'm coming from a missional context, and I'm thankful for the seekers that ask a million questions about faith and God in their lives.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes. And the great thing about starting to do this letter too is that these moments are also great moments to put in your church newsletter, in the bulletin, to share on Sunday morning before the offering, to say, I am so grateful for. So gratitude, besides being a wonderful spiritual discipline, also has so many great opportunities for being shared, not just in a letter. So I'm encouraged to hear the stories of gratitude. So I think we get the sense of where we want to start here. Now, the gracious action, we're going to spend the most time on that, and that's, I think, where people want to, what specifically do we want to do? And giving a chunk of money is not specific enough. Imagine when we write a thank you letter after we've written this fundraising letter, we're going to send out thank you letters. What's the thank you letter going to say? Thank you for your gift to this. Because of your generosity, we did whatever. So if you can, actually in fundraising in charity settings, often the thank you letter will be written at exactly the same time as the letter soliciting donations. It's all one creative endeavor. So that if it helps you think of what you're going to say thank you for afterwards, it might help you clarify what exactly it is that you're asking for. So we're going to have a bunch of slides on gracious action because I think that is the part that scares us the most. Whoops, let's go back. So the gracious action needed, be specific. I've got a few pictures here. One is a roof, one is a bunch of people. If your gracious action is that you want to raise enough funds to hire a youth pastor, say, or to fix the roof, or there's so many things. Is it a parish nurse? What is God calling you to do? But it's very important to be specific so that people can really see, touch, hear, and taste what is going to happen when they're generous.
Here's a question. When you're being specific, could you include specific dollar amounts?
Absolutely. Absolutely, yes. So I have our handy dandy gracious action guide here. Why give? How much? Why now? When Paul is writing to the church in Corinth, he is planning to send people to visit Corinth. So he just wants to give them a heads up to say, hey, coming around, so please be ready. That's kind of Paul's why now. But similarly, we need to have some kind of framework for what we're doing here. So why give? How much? Why now? This is a discussion that Karen and Jim and I have been having by email for the last couple of days, and I'm quite sure that we're in agreement on this one, that budget deficits and financial shortfalls are not a compelling reason for giving. I know that is often, we wish that it were a compelling reason for giving sometimes, but it isn't. Christians give from gratitude, not from emergency. So I don't know what brings you to this webinar or what the gracious action you're requiring is. We can certainly write a letter for a budget deficit or a financial shortfall, but we can't, that's not the gracious action. What gracious things are going to happen as a result of the money that we're going to get? So let's look at that a little bit more. What kind of ministry will these donations fund? Will this be helping with worship? Will this be helping with Christian education? Will this be helping with service? Will this be helping with counseling? Will this be helping with hospitality? What? And again, as I mentioned earlier about the running, whether it's a 5K race or a 10K race, if you're a church where your generosity muscles have already been exercised, if you're already working on telling stories and sharing testimony about generosity and talking about the offering, so this will be a little bit easier for you. We want to think about the question, not just this is keeping the lights on, but what ministry happens when the lights are on? I use that question a lot, and that's from my friend Grace Pomeroy, but it's a great question. Not the light bill, but what happens when the lights are on? That's the question we want to answer if we're talking about just a general kind of budget or deficit situation. Here are some opening sentences that I thought might work. Our congregation has a vision to do what we hear God calling us to do. We want to be good stewards of whatever it is, our building, our energy, our time. Or maybe it's a new wineskins approach and you feel like you hear God telling you to do something new and you want to build that child care center or start that vacation Bible school or whatever it is. What do you hear God calling you to do as a congregation? So why give? You can see two columns on this screen. One is the oh dear column, and one is the better column. And I think the best column is the third column that you're writing yourself on a piece of paper, which is how you would say it in your context, in your words. Just copy and change, or write something completely new. That's good too. So the oh dear column is if every member of Peach Blossom gave $2,000, our $100,000 deficit would be gone. Oh my. I think we may have seen letters like that before, and it doesn't spark joy. It doesn't acknowledge that some people give more and some people give less, and it doesn't say what great things God would do, or is doing, in fact, in our church. It is not inspiring. It is more like off-putting. The next one is better. And like I said, I think when you write your own letter in your words, knowing your congregation, you can pull something that you can bring the better to best. But this is something to start with. We value having a full-time minister who visits members who can't attend regularly. Our minister counsels those who need extra support and guides our community in times of grief and in times of joy. If you've heard me do webinars before, you know that I'll ask, what do you do on Tuesday mornings? or Thursday mornings, pick a day, because often people in the pews forget what happens during the week. They're not there. And, you know, the minister, I know that this isn't true, but the perception that the minister works 2 hours a week. I know you're rolling your eyes and I just can't see you, but the more you can tell the stories of what happens in your church, the better. Those stories, those things that you just take for granted, that phone call that you made today from someone who really needed a listening ear, that's worth a story. Your gift, the gift that we're asking for here, strengthens Peach Blossom's ministry of caring for each other and for the community, or St. Andrew's or Knox or whatever it is, obviously. Like I said, your letter might be something completely different, but it needs to be specific. And we still want to talk about that 100,000, but just not in the way that it is here. We might have something very specific to say, to hire the new youth pastor we will need, or we estimate the roof repairs will cost, or childcare for 40 children, or whatever it is. We would, instead of dividing the money out, we would ask every member to give as they are able. Some can give a little, some can give a lot. That's straight out of my good friend, the Apostle Paul. God can use all of our gifts. Together we build up God's kingdom. And then whatever the amount is, I think you do want to mention how much you need, because people are not very good at guessing. We'll fund and whatever it is. And I think a church's ministry would be better as our church's ministry of caring, our church's ministry of connecting to the community. Laurie, be even more specific than what you've written here. It's my advice to myself. So as I've said, please don't divide up the total amount by the number of households. That's off-putting, and manna doesn't work like that. Our biblical model of giving doesn't work like that. And in actual reality, the church giving never works like that either. If you ask, please do ask your church treasurer actually how the giving does work at your church. Is it concentrated? Is there a few people who give a lot? That's important to know. It's also likely that the people who give to you in response to your letter will be the people who are already giving a lot. So if we think back to the thank you letter that I shared just a few minutes ago, really, looking back at the faithful donors and the faithful worshipers who had built up St. Andrew's over so many years. We talked about being thankful for the contributions who sustain our church as a place of worship and welcome. Oh, and then I put in, you know, the request for $100,000, and it looks like here I've followed my advice about being a little more specific. $100,000 will fully fund our church's ministry of worship, education, fellowship, and service this year. And again, the more specific we can be, and if you can recall the letter, it talks about the things that happen at St. Andrew's. And why now? Why are we sending this letter now? Why wasn't it 6 months ago or 6 months from now? There needs to be some explanation of that. Maybe it's because we're hiring a youth minister and we want them to start in September when school starts. Maybe the best season for construction is the spring, and so we want to get the money gathered up before then. Maybe we aim to collect everything by the end of the year because that's how we plan. But what is the reason for why we're asking now? All right, that's lots and lots of words from Laurie. Maybe I'll take a breath or two, and are there any questions?
How often should we mail a financial ask letter? Annually only? Do we do any follow-up to it?
I think the best would be if you never had to do it. and that sounds like really strange words for a fundraising consultant. If we were saying thank you really often, very often, and sharing continually the great things that God was doing in our congregation, if we were encouraging people to sign up for pre-authorized giving, and if we were celebrating bequests and remembering people who had passed away and the donations made in their honor, if we were doing Bible studies on stewardship, if we were sharing moments for mission most weeks and testimony about giving, I anticipate that we wouldn't have to do that many fundraising letters. And maybe the fundraising letters that we would do would be for special new things, which are always more fun. So I think it's a bit like the running. If we were exercising our generosity muscles quite often in our church, we probably wouldn't have to do that many letters. We could if we wanted to, if we had special projects, but if we had a very generous congregation, we might not have to do them very often at all. I would want us to say thank you super often. We have so much to be grateful to God for. If the only time we talk about money is to ask for some, then there's something wrong.
Who should write a financial ask letter? Is it the minister? Is it the clerk of session or the chair of the fundraising committee?
That is a hard question to answer in the abstract. I think it's the same as a thank you letter, the person who knows that person best. But if you do have a chair, if you have a specific committee that's doing fundraising, I can see it being the chair of that committee, yeah. You definitely want the letter to be signed by a real it can't be signed by, sincerely the fundraising committee. It needs to be a person, and a person that you could talk to if you would like to.
Is this letter structure best for postal mail only? Would an email be similar?
An email would be similar. An email would be great because then you could put an actual link to your church website and say, here, click on here, and please don't make me try to find where the checkbook is that I've written 2 checks this year, and then stamps and then an envelope. I know that we'll have a demographic in our church that is big on stamps and envelopes, but we will also have a really big demographic in our church that is not. So it could be both.
Great. That's all the questions I have for now. If you want to keep moving along, I'll keep watching. Okay.
How is this landing with people? Can you think of, as you're hearing this, can you think in your context of, this is how I would write it? Is it? I will keep on, but yeah, if I'm going too fast or you have more questions, please jump in, because I know this is a lot of things. And I want to reassure you too that this is recorded and the notes are there, so you can always go back.
Here's a question, Lori. Do you write different letters to different people or different segments in your congregation? Like your church leaders or your, as opposed to members?
That is a really good question. The gold standard for fundraising letters is actually to have different letters for different folks. Like the people that are already very generous. You could say, thank you for, if you know that people have been supporting the church for 20 years, wouldn't it be nice to say that on the letter? Even a handwritten note. Thank you, James and Marg, for your long support of our church. We really appreciate it. Wouldn't that be great to just have a little handwritten note on the side of that? Do you think that James and Marg would appreciate that? I do.
Ooh, here's another good question, Lori. If we have never sent out an ask letter, should we send out a thank you letter first and then follow up with an ask letter? Or is incorporating both into one letter work as well? I hope it comes across really strongly that I'm a huge fan of thank you. If we've never said thank you for the previous gifts and we just keep asking, or we only talk about money when we want some,
we just haven't been good stewards of our gratitude or of God's grace. So I would do the thank you, even if you didn't want to, if you were worried that it was going to be too much timing wise, you could do a phone thank you and just say, as we think about money in our church, or just, you don't have to say that. Start with a thank you.
I'd agree with you, Lori. I think that if your first contact and the first thing you send to people in your congregation is an ask letter, they might raise eyebrows. So I'd say start with a thank you letter and have some space, and then do an ask, or even send a thank you letter and send them your newsletter. Like, I agree with you with that. And then get a culture of sort of talking with them for something other than an ask. And then you can then if you incorporate asks with, oh, they've already been in touch, they're not just looking to me for money, then it feels more natural, and it feels a lot better, I think.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you for rephrasing that so well, Karen. Yes. It's like if we are already 5K runners because we've been talking about money and we have a newsletter and we're giving reports and we're saying thank you, then the next, going to the 10K and saying an ask letter isn't a big stretch.
Okay. One more question before I let you go on. Should you include, it just takes people a few minutes to type things in.
Sure.
Should you include a self-addressed stamped envelope or a return envelope with a financial ask letter?
I would. If you want someone to do something, make it easy. And I really encourage you to, along the lines of making it easy, to say, here's how you can give on our website. That is really the currency of our day when it comes to giving.
Great. I'll let you keep going and I'll keep watching the questions.
Okay, thanks, Karen. So just to sum up that, please do say thank you. And it's so important. And just to say, send out a thank you letter, to phone people, to say thank you. Like, you don't want your first financial conversation to be an ask. So here's some advice for writing that really applies to more than just letters, which is start with a bad letter, then edit. Your congregation might have a favorite hymn or worship song or passage of scripture, and that's great to incorporate too. A long letter is okay. It is okay. Your cost of paper or production is really not going to be an issue. And if you wanted to tell a long story of gratitude or to explain your plans, that's totally fine. Don't worry about, while I am in much of my life try to be compact about things, it's totally fine to do a long letter. Okay, so just to review where we've been here, we start by acknowledging God's grace, whether that's the new elders that have been called, whether that's the hospitality that our church has shown. We think about the grace that has been extended to us in our congregation, and then we respond with gracious action. And that could be a specific fund of money because we are starting to do DVBS or Vacation Bible School, or because we want to set up a fund because we want to be able to send our kids to a Christian camp, or whatever it is. What is that gracious action that we're calling people to do? And we want to be very specific about it. The last circle that I've got highlighted here is finishing the circle and praise and thanksgiving, being grateful to God for the generosity in our congregation. So finish by saying thank you. I am again borrowing some words from my good friend, the Apostle Paul, writing in 2 Corinthians 9. And I would really encourage you to pull up blueletterbible.org or whatever Bible you like. The New Living Translation of 2 Corinthians 9 is something that I've been really quite fond of lately, and this little thank you here is pretty much cribbed from 2 Corinthians 9. So 2 good things will result from this ministry of giving. We will hire a youth pastor to reach out to our community and we will joyfully express our thanks to God for the opportunity to serve and to grow. Because one of the great results of a giving project is just that we are doing something together, that we together as the body of Christ are working together. So there's just an inherent goodness in a common project. There's a purpose and a community building aspect to whatever kind of project we undertake together. So it's not just the outcome of having the youth pastor or the new roof or whatever your outcome is. It's that joy we get from working together and our gratitude for God for the opportunity to work together. And I couldn't resist, again, borrowing from Paul about excelling in this gracious act of giving, to include a PS. To contribute online, please visit our church website at designate your gift to. We do not want to send the message that giving is something that only older people are expected to do, older people with checkbooks. We want younger people, our online, our digital people, to be able to contribute as well. And I know I've sung the praises of Canada Helps before. That would be the simplest way if you don't have an online giving button on your church website. Canada Helps would be the simplest way that I know to get that.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking some congregations might feel overwhelmed by trying to include a self-addressed stamp envelope or return envelope because they don't want to buy stamps and put them in. But I thought if you had that sort of, you can go give online, it makes them nice and easy for them to be able to give, or you can encourage them also to bring it to their offering if they're coming on Sunday. And so sort of knowing your context can be good. And those can be other ways to make it nice and easy for people to give.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the people here, the people listening on the webinar are the experts on their context. So I am trusting God's grace to flow to you in deciding how you address your congregation. This slide I borrowed from the thank you letter webinar that we did, I guess, a month or two ago. And it's the essentials of a good letter don't really change whether it's a thank you letter or a fundraising letter. It's personal. It says, "Dear name," and you can see my little soapbox there. It's time to learn how to do a mail merge in Microsoft Word. You can do this. Just Google it, mail merge Microsoft Word, and there'll be a YouTube video showing you how to do it. So you can really just take a letter in Word and print it out, 100 of them with 100 different people's names on it. It's not hard. Grateful. I know I've said that so many times, but it's impossible to be too grateful. The letter needs to be grateful. Desperation is just not an appealing attitude for a letter. Signed by a real person, whether it's a fundraising person or someone in church leadership or the pastor. I'll leave that decision to your church, but signed by an actual person and then sent out. And then if it's mailed, mail is good. Mail sits on your kitchen counter, and you could send an email too and say, hey, we're sending this by email, just to make sure in your busy life that you have a chance to access. However, we're also, that's fine. You could send both. All right, please type in your questions. Has anyone started putting down scratching out what a letter might look like for you?
Everyone's thinking, okay, if you're putting a letter in the mail, should you do anything? What should the envelope look like? Should it just be one of the congregation's plain envelopes? Should you put any messages on it?
I've experimented with that in a little bit in various places. What you would like people to do is open the envelope. So Again, the gold standard would be someone with lovely handwriting who actually writes the address on, but I don't want to make this an impossible thing. If that's not a possible thing, then, you know, the address label would be totally fine. I know I put little stickers on letters sometimes, like little, I mean, it's Valentine's Day, it could be a little heart, spring, it could be a little flower, or you might say, Lori, that is silly. No one in my church wants to get a letter with a flower, and that's fine. You want it to be warm and personal. That's what we're going for. So window envelope would be sort of, you know, where, you know, those window envelopes we have where we fold up the letter and that would be the least personal. I mean, if that's what you have the technology to do, then that's what you should do. But warm and personal is our goal here. Does that help?
I think so, yeah. Do you have any tips if fundraising is for outside the church for a mission? Should the letter be any different?
Is the church is the church, like, is it donations to the church to fund a mission, or is it donations straight to a mission?
Yeah, that's a good question. Straight to the mission.
Then you should, yeah, then it would be, you would want to have the letterhead of the mission. And you would, yeah, and obviously as much official, you know, what's the mission's website, what's your connection? Like, if you're an existing supporter of the mission, then you'd have a different connection. If you have the church mailing list and you're using it to send everyone a letter asking them to support ABC mission, then you want to explain what your connection is too. So context really matters on that one.
I think it also, you need to know who you're writing to and what they might respond to. So sort of think about the messages they'll respond to. What are they going to connect with about the mission, and why are you writing them? But all the principles are very much there. Why should they give? What will their giving accomplish? Why should they give now? And, you know, sort of, and then anything that makes it seem more real. So being as specific as possible and attaching some money to that.
Oh, sure. And pictures are wonderful. Here is the picture of the school in Nicaragua, and we're so grateful because we've had the opportunity to work together with the church in Nicaragua, and this is the school, and now we're looking to get started again. It's, you know, for September we want to do this. Yeah, the more specific and the more real. A picture is really worth 1,000 words too.
One person writes in that they write little personal messages on the back outside of the sort of type letters, or they write messages on the back outside of mailed letters.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yes. That's, the more personal it can be, the better. Because these are people that we're talking about. These are people that God loves. That's who we're writing to.
Here's another question. Does the thank you letter prior to the ask letter need to be a standalone letter, or could it be incorporated in our newsletter that's distributed to everyone in the congregation?
I don't know your newsletter, so I would see that you're
I think you could maybe, what if you put the letter with the newsletter when you distribute it to everyone in the congregation? Or if are you mailing out the newsletter? It depends a little bit with the context.
Yeah, and I would want it to be the lead item in your newsletter. I see it the first. Please, I know this sounds really like a very picky detail, but please use a very large font. Picture the donor in your congregation who is 85 and her eyesight isn't what it was. And so please make your letter nice and big and easy to read so that she can read it. That's being respectful and honoring of people. And again, you're going to, when you're thanking letter in your newsletter, are you thanking people what about the people who didn't give? I mean, that's a whole other webinar. And I actually have a blog post about that. Thank you letters for people who didn't give. It's something to think about. If we have people who haven't been regular givers to our church who have never gotten a receipt, then we would certainly want to send out a different, and we want to send them a fundraising letter. That is a different kind of letter than giving it to Mrs. Alton, who's been donating for 25 years.
Here's one. Could you ask for volunteer time as an alternative to money, or would that muddy the message?
If it's real difficult to answer in the abstract, if you're writing money, if you're running, collecting money to hire a youth pastor, then volunteer time isn't really necessarily going to be helpful to you.
Great. Okay, I don't see any other questions at this time.
Wow. Well, we are just, I thought that we would just really be going into extra innings here because there's so much material. So I want to commend you for your patience and your endurance in covering a lot of material. We have a bit of time left. Do you want me to go back to one of the earlier slides that had a letter? Would that be helpful? Or would you just appreciate an extra couple of minutes in your day? I know this is a really difficult question to answer via technology.
Let's go back to your letter example. And if anyone has an idea for what they might do for their letter, they could share it with the group. That'll help inspire some of our.
The more examples that you have, the better. And it doesn't, again, it's, take a sad song and make it better, to quote the Beatles. Your first writing doesn't have to be that great. You just write something and then you say, oh, well, I can make it a bit better. Or you show it to somebody else and they say, oh, well, you know what, we could say this. And then ta-da, it's already getting better. So it's an incremental process. So here's a paragraph that you could add, that I put in, about asking everyone to give as they are able, reminding that God can use all of our gifts, and then talking about an amount, and the more specific you can be, the better. What is that money for?
And if anyone drafts a letter and they want an outside pair of eyes to look at it and see how it might sound and give you ideas for how it might look better, you can feel free to email myself, kplater@presbyterian.ca, or our development manager, James McDonald, JMacDonald @presbyterian.ca, and we'd be happy to take a look at your letters and give you ideas for how to make them better.
Maybe you could type your email address into the chat too, for people who weren't able to follow that quickly. And on my last slide, I do have Karen's email address. So that is an excellent idea, because this is a very communal thing that we're doing here. And when we think of our giving as what we are able to accomplish together, maybe we could think of our letters as the same thing. How can we together ask graciously and thank graciously as well? Okay.
Anyone have any ideas what they're going to say for their letters? Okay, I think we'll go to the last slide and we'll wrap this up.
Okay. Again, I am so impressed by our collective perseverance here. So, and this is my contact information, my blog, where I am on Twitter if you're a Twitter person, and Karen's information, and you've got Jim's information in the chat. So I wanted to say thank you, and to pray an encouragement, oh my, someone at example.com, to pray encouragement for you in the ministry context that you find yourself. And a reminder that this webinar and many others are on the Presbyterian website. So that's presbyterian.ca. I think it's webinar/previous webinar as where to find these. So thank you very much for being here, and blessings in your ministry.
Great, and we're getting a couple of thank yous pop up. So thank you very much, Lori, for once again sharing your wisdom and enthusiasm and your generosity with us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Okay, you can watch for the new postings of our next webinars. We're just in the midst of planning our next series, so watch for emails from me. Thanks.
All right, thank you.